Hello and welcome to This Day in History on the Table. The date is February 2nd, and we're going all the way back to 1943 and the city of Stalingrad. Welcome to This Day in History on the Table, a new series we're doing covering key historical moments, key battles, key military engagements, just important dates in history, and talking about the games that cover those moments. If this is your first time watching us, welcome. If you're a listener from our monthly podcast, thanks for checking out the YouTube channel. My name's Matt. I do a monthly podcast talking about war games and other historical games with my co-host Rich. You can check us out, History on the Table. But today we're here to talk about Stalingrad. February 2nd marks the end of the Battle of Stalingrad. And the objective of this video will just give you a brief rundown of the history around the battle, and then we're going to talk about some of my favorite games on the subject. There are tons and tons of games covering the Battle of Stalingrad, so if I don't mention one of your favorites, don't feel too ashamed. I'm only going to mention a couple of games. I'm not going to make this this isn't a top 10 list or anything. It's just a couple of games that I think recommend or that I'm going to recommend because of their ability to just capture different not emotions, but just different aspects of the battle. And then we'll talk about some books you can check out if you're interested. So let's back up a little bit. The Battle of Stalingrad really kicked off in the summer of 1942, but you have to go back a little bit until 1941 when Hitler and the Germans made a surprise declaration of war on the Russians, and after a failed siege of Moscow, had a hellish winter, and after a failed Russian counteroffensive, Germany, namely Hitler, decided to go on the offensive again. This time their sights were set on Stalingrad, which is interesting because Stalingrad is a city in southern Russia that really doesn't offer much of a strategic objective other than it housed tank factories and was a production center. Really, it was more of Hitler's ego, is my understanding, as to why Stalingrad was targeted against the better judgment of some military leaders in the German army. So starting with the summer of 1942, the Germans basically rolled the Russians up and pushed them all the way back to the Volga River, which is where Stalingrad sits, and almost, really, my senses almost took the city. But Stalingrad quickly became one of the bloodiest battles in all of military history, certainly World War II. Almost 2 million casualties, and it became a very long and drawn-out battle for control of the city. And ultimately, because of Hitler's stubbornness, even as the German generals tried to withdraw from the city, German leadership demanded that they continue to fight. And at the same time, Stalin and the Russians were forbidding anyone from taking one more step back. You know, there's all these horrific stories about Russian commissars killing anyone, deserters or anyone retreating. And I should say there's horrific stories on both sides here. It's really a story of heroics, but also just some unbelievable, awful, but also just awesome in the literal sense, not like, whoa, that's awesome, story. It really is, I think, obviously it's an important moment in World War II history. It really, you could argue that the failed siege of Moscow was maybe a turning point, but certainly in my opinion, and I'm far from an expert, the failed Battle of Stalingrad was really a turning point, in my opinion, of World War II. I think one thing that makes Stalingrad so interesting is you get all these amazing heroic stories. You hear of people surviving in bunkers for 6 months, or as we'll see here in a little bit, the story of an apartment building that holds out for 60 days from endless, German assaults on the building. But eventually what ends up happening is the Russians boldly counterattack the Germans and encircle the Germans and basically trap 250,000 Germans between the Don and the Volga. and there were some attempts to break the German Sixth Army out in December, and ultimately that failed. And so you end up with this encirclement, and that keeps getting fractured. And eventually General Paulus, the general of Sixth Army, is captured. And on February 2nd, the Russians, that's the official date that the Russians retake Stalingrad. So there's your brief rundown of the Battle of Stalingrad. I think it's interesting to look at that battle at different levels, and that's exactly what we're going to do. As I said, all kinds of games on the Battle of Stalingrad. You can pretty much take your preferred World War II tactical game of choice. If you're new to wargaming tactical, usually you're talking about counters, individual pieces representing 15 men or so, and you can find Stalingrad scenarios. Combat Commander, I'm sure ATS Advanced Tobruk system, Band of Brothers, I think, has some Eastern Front stuff. Now, I have yet to get to this, but I have been playing quite a bit of ASL, Advanced Squad Leader, over a couple of years, so I want to be doing my duty if I didn't show off Red Factories, because it gives you the ability, not only can you play, a scenario that's set here, but you can also you can do this big combined beautiful Stalingrad map and do this awesome campaign game. So not a true recommendation in the sense, but I felt like I should point it out. I'm going to focus on two games, and I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of what I think they accomplish. And then if you check back over the next couple weeks, we're going to do some videos that dive into these games just a little bit more. And then, of course, check out History on the Table. We have a featured video on Stalingrad 42, which we'll talk about. And then we'll be featuring Pavlov's House, the other game we're going to talk about in an upcoming episode. So let's start with Pavlov's House, because, like I said, Stalingrad, to me, is really one of the reasons I find it so interesting are these heroic and amazing stories, this story of perseverance. And I mean, obviously, again, awful things happened, over 2 million casualties and horrendous war crimes on both sides. But I think this is an interesting story to take away from it. Pavlov's House is designed by David Thompson, and it's put out by Dan Versen Games. This was a Kickstarter, but I think you can pick it up at retail now. I'm not sure if it's still in print. Pavlov's system is a primarily solo game. You can play co-op, you can play competitively, but I think really ultimately it is a solo game. And the beautiful thing about Pavlov's House is it gives you 3 levels of combat, really. You're inside the apartment building where they held out for 60 days, and you're actually controlling each individual person. So Pavlov's in there, and there's other historical individuals represented by counters fighting in that house, and you're moving around the house and making very tactical decisions. Then on the next section of the map, you're zoomed out, and you're watching as the German army collapses in on that building, and you're trying to keep them from advancing into the building, or you lose. And then you even take it a step further, and you're way zoomed out, and you're kind of dealing with high command. You're worrying about bringing in reinforcements, about anti-aircraft, artillery, bringing in supplies across the river. And so it reminds me of a system called States of Siege, where the forces are encroaching in closer, and if they ever get to kind of your home base, no matter what the game's trying to represent, then you lose. And so that's present here, but it takes that core system and just kind of blows it up, right? A very good game. I highly recommend it. Now, I want to zoom out a little bit, and I want to talk about one of my favorite games of all time, and one of my favorite series of all time. And that is Stalingrad 42 by Mark Simonich. This is part of his Zachbon series. You can see some of the others I have up on the shelf over here. That's why that hole's there. Stalingrad 42 is an operational scale starting with the summer. So you start all the way at Kharkov and move to Stalingrad, and by operational, you're playing like a whole front. So we're not talking about squads. We're zoomed out. This has some interesting supply rules, and it really, I think, captures the German advance onto Stalingrad as well as the Russian counteroffensive back. So it's pretty interesting, because at the beginning of the game, the German player's kicking butt, but then the Russian players are going to get their chance to strike back. Also, it incorporates some rules where, like, the German tanks are able to zoom way ahead, which is what happened in the summer of 1942. So two different scales. We're going to talk about these games in more detail. Come back, check out the videos. Two games that I really enjoy. In the Zokbon series, I think this is Mark Simonich's best game in that series to date. Some other games, Normandy 44, Holland 44, Ardennes 44, and then there's France 1940 and a Italian front game coming on the way. They're both very approachable. Pavlov's House, if you're intimidated by war games, which in my opinion you really shouldn't be, if you put in the work, they're very enjoyable. Pavlov's House is very easy to learn. It seems like a lot, but really if you just kind of get the flow of the game, you can just refer back to the rules each time a new card comes up. Stalingrad 42 is a lot. It's a monster. There are some one map scenarios, but really this whole game just blows up. It takes up our whole dining room table. Looks gorgeous. Takes a while, but it's worth the effort. So those are two games that I recommend on the Battle of Stalingrad. I'd like to hear what some of yours are. Like I said, there's so many, but those are two that I have played and really, really enjoy, especially Stalingrad 42. It is a true favorite of mine. So let's say you check out these games and you want to learn more about the battle. I've got two books for you to check out if you'd like. The first is Enemy at the Gates. Not this, but this. And I'm going to throw a disclaimer in with Enemy at the Gates. I think it tells a very good military history, but it's very flawed in my opinion. I think the author makes a lot of excuses for the atrocities committed by the German army. And it's weird. It didn't sit right with me. But if you're able to look past that, then I still recommend the book. Now, if you're not able to look past that, or if you just want more, then I am currently reading Anthony Beevor's Stalingrad book, which is very good so far. I really like it. And one thing I really like about it is from the onset, he's not making any excuses for the German army, and he holds them accountable for the things that happened. And I'm not saying that the Russians didn't do anything wrong. No, both sides did terrible things. It was weird to me how the author in Enemy at the Gates made excuses or gave passes to the German army. So that is a very brief rundown of this day in history covering the Battle of Stalingrad. We'll be back. Share your favorite books or movies on Stalingrad, the games you like to play. Stalingrad to me is a lot like the Battle of Gettysburg or Battle of the Bulge. There's a lot of games covering that topic, but it's an interesting topic. We won't get into how interesting I find the Bulge itself. I do find Gettysburg interesting, but to me Stalingrad's very interesting, and I will continue to look for good games on the topic. It's just a matter of getting all of this stuff played. So thanks for checking us out. Do me a big favor, hit the subscribe button down below. We're trying to get a custom URL. We need 100 subscribers for that. Give it a like. Check us out on Twitter. We have a Facebook group if you want to come hang out. All of those things, all of those links are down below. All right, we'll be back in a couple of weeks. We'll take a deep dive into these two games.